This conference will now be recorded.
So today we're going to talk about some of the different thoughts about accessing the raw SQL database, the different elements of what that consists of, and put it a little bit in the context of using RStudio to make a connection and do some scripting. But I'll admit that R is not a specialty of mine, so I'm just going to touch on that a little bit. But the bottom line is we've worked with some agencies to make some suggestions so that the data integrity is safe, but the data access is available. Ultimately, we think the best way to do that is using different logins to the database to make sure that no accidents happen and no data is altered in that way. So the first part of today is just going to be some reference material about how to set up those types of roles. We'll go through a couple of links, and those links will be documented in the GoToAssist knowledge base item related to this webinar once it's posted. After that, we'll go away from the kind of informational links, and I'll show how I set up a user in one of our databases, our SQL databases, to have this data reader role. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just walk through a couple queries. Some will demonstrate how the access is different for that user, and some will demonstrate how some of our tables connect. So once you do have a connection with your chosen application for data analysis, you'll be able to write some queries that might be somewhat meaningful. We're just going to touch on a couple of the basic tables, and if there's more questions or more information needed, you can reach out to me or support@drdas.com for more information or more details. So I have 3 links here to show first, and they're really just informational, so I'm going to kind of breeze through them a little bit before we get into the meat of the webinar. This first link, although it's not an official Microsoft link, it's actually a pretty good summary of both what the different roles are in a SQL database that are available by default and how to set them up. So this is talking about the data reader role, and it goes through each of the different types of roles that SQL has built into it. You can see data reader just gives the ability to look at data from any table in the database, which is the key functionality for grabbing a data set for analysis. And then the second part of this link does go into the steps for how to make that in case you are in a position to manage your own SQL server. If not, it might be something that's required to go up the chain to a DBA through IT departments and things like that. And using some of the language in this URL should at least help. Specifically, DB_data reader, that is the name of the role. And I know in some of my previous conversations, I mistakenly said it was data_reader. I hope the DBAs understand that I made that mistake, but it's DB_data reader. But basically that role just can read the tables from the database, the data in those tables, and nothing more. So there's no danger of accidentally editing data. Data edits would still have to be essentially exported to an Excel and manually imported. So there's some data integrity with the edit history. And that's really essentially all that's needed to get by collecting data for that analysis. Oracle's a little more difficult. You're almost definitely going to go to a DBA to get some assistance with this. Oracle does have some built-in roles, but they're a different context, so that terminology isn't quite the same. Really what you're needing to do in Oracle is to define another user that has specific access to just read the tables. I mean, it's essentially the same net result, but this chapter of the official Oracle documentation goes into quite a bit of detail about how to set up some of this fine-grained access control, as they say, so you can limit the access using the select queries. So that's basically what you need, is a select query on the tables and views if you want that. But this document is a reference where you can read through some of the different context. And of course, being Oracle instead of SQL, it's written at a different level. I think that's an engineered decision So a DBA might be able to help you more with that if you need to construct a request. And if you have any specific questions about that, you can also ask, but this link will also be available in the knowledge base entry. And finally, since many are going to be using R, but some might be using something different like Power BI or other, have other purposes for accessing read-only data. If there's any connection information that's helpful or needed, I can certainly help try to find an answer to some of those types of scenarios. But Keith Hoffman with Delaware found this link, and it discusses the essential needs for using an RStudio system to connect into the SQL database. And it's basically just identifying the driver and the server name and the database name, a username and a password. So it just uses this construction here to make a connection. And from there, this discusses very little after that. So using that connection within the context of R, like I said, that's a little out of my expertise range, but I'd be glad to help find some answers if I can with the limited time I can devote to it. So if there's any questions beyond this, I'd be glad to look a little bit because I kind of like to know about this type of stuff when I have an excuse to learn it. So those are the 3 links I wanted to share in this first part of the webinar, and all of these will be in the knowledge base entry. So I'm going to move on to our SQL database. So in this database, you can see this tree is logged in as SA, which is the system admin. They have full permissions over the database. And what I did is I created under security a new login called Reader. And if I go to this login's properties, and these are the steps that are essentially gone over in that first link I shared. In the user mapping tab, I've basically created a single database for access. So I just checked the one box for this webinar. And when I click on it, you can see that the data reader is selected as the permission set. Just an aside, all of our tables are created with the DBO schema scope. So this will usually be the default that's added, and if it's not there, you can just add DBO. That's just kind of the name of it's prefixed on many of the tables you'll see, but that's the name of the user that creates a schema usually. In this case, DBO is fairly generic. So this is a basic setup for a data reader login. And if I just close this and minimize this connection to the database, you can see I have a second one here for reader. And this second connection, you can still see all of the databases that are available, but I shouldn't be able to do anything with them because I don't have permissions on them. So this database is not accessible to me. But if I wanted to expand Maryland, since that was where I have permissions, you can see that I can look at all of the tables that are available. And furthermore, to demonstrate some of that access and how it's different, I have some queries here set up. So there's a table called FTP. This is just generic FTP connections to remote sites. So you can see that I can execute a query to read from it. But if I wanted to truncate the table, which is a form of editing, it removes all of the rows from the table. When I click execute, it says that it can't find the object or I don't have permission. So this is just a quick demonstration of that lock that a DB data reader can't accidentally remove information. They also can't update the tables. So that's essentially all that's needed to create a data reader and verify that it's working correctly. Just having that SA account, again, you might need a DBA for that. Add a new user, give them access to the database that's desired with that DBO schema, and make sure that their role is set to DB_data reader. And that should be all that you need to read from the tables. Now, once you can read from the tables, you might need to know what to ask the database to give you. So I've set up some queries here. The first 3 are just generic select queries from various tables. So TB station is a table that lists all of the stations and a bunch of metadata about how it's configured within the system. So you can see a bunch of information here about the stations. And then there is TB Monitor, which breaks down a list of monitors based on the station. You can see though right away that there's no station name or monitor name. So this table is using a couple columns, the station serial code and the monitor type, is essentially indexed tables to fill in that information programmatically. So we don't have station names and we don't have monitor type names here. The monitor type names are in this table called TB monitor type. So if I execute this query, we should see a bunch of monitor type names. These are those templates of monitor types that exist within Envista. And when you add one to a station, it creates a record in TB monitor. So now the essential need is to combine these three tables to get a meaningful query in the end. And what I have here is just a basic select statement that's broken down into some smaller elements. It doesn't have all of the metadata for each point. It just has the name of the station, the name of the monitor, the coding then, the station serial code, that index, the monitor channels index, and the monitor type index. That's just to cross-reference everything. To make these tables lock together in the query, in this case, we're going to use an inner join. There's many different types of joins, and your application might need different joins than an inner join. But in this case, an inner join is a simple way to make sure that the reference tables match. And so what we're doing here is matching the monitor station serial code from the TB monitor to the station serial code index in the TB station. And similarly, we're doing the monitor type code, although it doesn't say code, that's what it is, and MOT monitor type code in the monitor type table. So when I run this, we should get a few different columns, and we should see the station name, the monitor name, and some of the indexed coding. And we do. So we have Essex, Ozone, and then if we scroll down a little bit in the query results, we'll see the next station, Davidsonville, and so on. Now, of course, especially once you get into the habit of using joins, you'll understand that it's helpful to double check your work and make sure. So this list should essentially be the same number of result rows as what's in TB monitor, because that's what we're really looking for here, is a list of all of the monitors at each station in the Envista system. So when I ran this, you can see the result is 1162. And if I just run that TB monitor select, that didn't seem to have much information in it, you can see that result is the same. So we know that this query is pretty good for what we need here. The last thing I want to talk about, I don't have any preset queries for it, but I wanted to show, let's say you wanted, I'm just going to scroll to a random row here. Let's say we wanted Old Town's solar radiation. You can see here that the station serial code and the monitor channel are listed. So it's station 16 and monitor channel 19. So to find that data in the database, we have a series of S tables. So what we would need to do is go to S016, so S16, and there's a 0 there because it could go up to 999. So these S16 tables are all going to be the data for Old Town. After the T, you'll find the time base. So that would be 1 minute data, and here would be daily data, and here's hourly data. So if we were to expand this and look at the columns, the data for the solar radiation would be in value 19, status 19. So value 19 is here, and status 19 is here. If we wanted to run a query, so select star from S016 T60, we would see a list of all of the data in the system for this station, and it'll take a moment for the rows to fill in because it is probably an older station. So we have 76,000 rows here. And if we scroll over, of course, there might be times when the solar radiation isn't set up here, or it could have just been a template. So we do have 999s and zeros as the value and status. But that brings up a good point. the last piece of the puzzle is once you get to the value, you need to know if it's a valid status or not. So that's the last table I'll show you, and it should be, sorry, TB data status. This is a list of all the status codes used in the system. And oops, when we run this, it'll give us a few different points. So remember that 0. When we go to TB data status, we can see that 0 means no data. And we can also see that, oops, I'm sorry, this is the 0 to look for. This 0 means that it's invalid. If this is a 1, then that code, that data type code, that data status code is valid. So there's a couple of those through the system, especially at the end. We have some of these combined status fields for OK, RS-232, things like that. But you'll want to use that status 19 column for the solar radiation at Old Town to see the validity of the data that you're going to process. So that's the last piece of the puzzle. That kind of covers everything I had on the agenda to go over today. It's just a basic crash course. You can see there's many, many tables in the Envista system. So if you run into any questions about where to get something, if we don't know, we can certainly research it for you. But do you have any questions for me?
Hi, Nathan. It's Jerry.
Hi, Jerry.
Hey. Yeah, just kind of going back to the beginning of your presentation. I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but because I came in a bit late, but I'm just wondering why might there be some reasons to be assigned a data reader role in the data?
Oh yeah. So there is there was some context at the beginning. A lot of what we're seeing requests for now that have driven this webinar, and it's not a major request, a few agencies here or there, but I have a feeling that it's going to become more important, want to do things like R scripting, so they can access a bunch of data and review it for various statistical anomalies or flags, and then have the ability to import that data through Excel or some sort to Envista securely, so that it preserves the data integrity without accessing the database directly for the edits. So that's an example. That's example one, is this kind of advanced analysis in R script that an agency might want to electively do on their own. The second example is there's I think a burgeoning trend, but I think it'll actually be even more so in the next 3 to 5 years of trying to use data presentation software like Tableau, Power BI, and other tools that are out there to access the data. So using a data reader for that utility service basically is a good way to keep the database secure while using a live database on a public information system.
Okay. So that like the data reader role is it just more like convenience for that kind of those kind of procedures as opposed to like a I don't know, like an admin role that's been assigned?
Right, so the data reader level, the role on that level is controlled by the SQL server itself. And what it says is you can only do certain things. That applies to any role, really. Some roles are more open than others. The data reader role specifically says you can only read from tables. So you can only have access to that select command. If you were to have like the data reader and data writer role, which you can apply both of them, then you would be able to do things like insert and update queries. And then as you extend on, really most of those roles are based on the keywords that you want to use for a transact SQL statement. Some of them aren't, some of them have, more elaborate purposes, but essentially those transact SQL statements drive many applications. So most of these roles are based on the keywords in Transact SQL that you have access to. For instance, select or insert or update or truncate or drop, things like that. The data reader role only has access to select.
Okay, so like the like an admin role would already kind of have that data reader feature.
Right, the admin role would already have that, but if a user of the admin role were inadvertently running a query that they might have constructed which accidentally updates data, for instance, then that might be something that would go undetected within the concept of the data integrity of the database. So you wouldn't have the full edit chain of the data in that case.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yeah, and just as an aside, if you had like a Power BI or a Tableau or something, and a malicious actor or a hacker of some sort were able to find a way to manage the connection to the database, then if that were using an admin role, the malicious actor would then be able to do destructive acts on the database. So in particular for those types of things, unless you're certain of the security pattern that you have for protecting the database, then you'd want to use something like data reader for that if you can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Nathan, this is Kyle from Metro Vancouver. I just wanted to say thanks for the presentation. I have actually been working quite extensively with RStudio and SQL and tapping into the database directly over the last couple of years, and have started dabbling in Tableau and exactly what you're describing there. And so maybe I'll just echo what you're saying, that I think there's a lot of value in doing that. We've seen a lot of more advanced analysis is enabled by having these direct connections through scripts and generating reports on the fly for complex analysis and things. So I think this is a really timely webinar, and I think hopefully others on the call found this helpful, but I'm happy to talk to you as well if you want to see some of the stuff that I've done in RStudio. But yeah, really appreciate the talk and glad to see we're sort of embracing this.
Yeah, and our concept, this is like an introductory concept to all of this, of course, and that's all that it's intended to be at this point. But we, as DR DAS, as a company, are evaluating ways to go even further than just facilitating this access through a webinar like this and having information available. I'll probably be trickling out some ideas and concepts over the course of this calendar year to build up to some ideas that we have that will be hopefully helpful in the long run. But we want to make it clear that there's two things that might have an essential conflict, in that we want to provide data access. We don't encrypt the database. We have no clauses in our contracts that we own the database structure. We've never done anything like that. We've always had these basic types of things in a data dictionary, not every table, of course, but the basic access items. But the other side of it is we also want to preserve the data integrity of the database itself. And I think that this DB data reader role or a similar setup in Oracle is a great starting point for the more experienced R users like yourself to start going down that road, building the tools. And DR DAS is going to try to facilitate it with some additional stuff in the future, I think. But I'll leave it until we settled on what we're going to do. Any other questions or comments? Okay, great. Well, I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thanks to everybody for joining and sticking around. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you found it interesting. And this will be posted for review later on GoToAssist with some of those referential links and maybe some of these demonstration queries too. So I really appreciate your time and have a great weekend.
Okay, thanks.